Not ready? Now we're ready to go. We are recording, we're live. Very grateful that all of you are with us. My first time leading the webinar in 2 weeks. I was in Atlanta 2 weeks ago. Michael led it last week. I'm really happy to be back with you for the next hour or so. Grateful to my team, of course, for joining. We have Kent, we have Matt, we have Scott, and all of you. Thank you very much for joining. Today, I want to cover, I hate to say horror stories, but sometimes we can learn as much from the bad as the good. So we're going to touch on some consequences of bad choices. We're going to touch on, how do we say it? What happens when you get the blow off, as my mom loves to say, from a case manager or someone, if you do this work and you're hoping that they find value in it, or they, Frank, good to see you, or they elect to throw that work you do in the toilet or say, get out of my office. How do we respond to that? What are some of the next steps? We're also going to dive into a few case studies, people in our community, including Andy, who was just sentenced yesterday. Chris, I don't know if he'll be able to join. He was literally just sentenced in Atlanta about 90 minutes ago, got a great outcome. And I'm hoping that Chris will contribute and share some of his feedback today. As a reminder, I run White Collar Advice, which proudly sponsors our nonprofit Prison Professors. And there's tons of content on prison professors. And to the extent that we can give it all away to you, I think by now, you know, we try to. We're always going to be honorable and tell you the truth, including we can't change the past, but we want to help you create a better path moving forward. And that only happens if you're active, having tough conversations, holding people you hire, including our team, accountable, and ensuring that you don't look forward with continued regret. And that's a lot of the calls that our team continues to receive. Someone is at a certain spot in the journey.
I don't know. I'm going to listen to what they're going to talk.
And please, Scott, if you can begin to do your thing and start
30
meeting
minutes.
everyone, that would be great. Everyone, if you can mute yourselves.
Yep, I'm working on
That
it.
would be terrific. Although I'm sure your private conversation is very interesting. Thank you. So we want to ensure that you're making better decisions moving forward. To that end, I want to start off with my good friend, Ron. Ron, when I was in Atlanta, Ron and I spent several hours together over dinner, and it was wonderful. Ron has already been sentenced to prison, and he shared his successful case study. But what I appreciated about my dinner with Ron, not complaining, talking about the journey, getting ready to go to prison for 6 years. He's living productively. In other words, it's not like he's already in prison like so many people live. So Ron, now that you've been sentenced and you're getting ready to go to Montgomery, how are you feeling and how are you managing to stay so productive? I don't want you to go Anthony Robbins here, motivational, but you're productive and you're living, but you're going in for 6 years. Can you talk about your mindset a little bit, please?
Sure. I was, my mindset going through this whole process, probably like everybody else that's on with us today, it was very depressing. And, fear of the unknown, not sure what our life's going to look like, both during the process, once we're on the inside, when we come out the other side. So it was very daunting. And I wrestled with that for months. I'm not saying this because I have to, but it wasn't until luckily I stumbled upon Michael and Justin. And it was, unfortunately for me, it was after I'd already gone to trial and was found guilty. Once I started coming to the webinars, and at first I initially just sat back and listened and learned, I realized that there was life after prison, and that was encouraging for me. And that actually built momentum. And the harder I worked with the materials that I could access through them and to work with White Collar Advice, the more promising the other side looks to me now. So I look at it now more as it's an unfortunate inconvenience, and I'm going to be out of pocket for a while. My goal, as everyone on here should be, is how do I get in there? How do I serve my time properly? And how do I get out to my family as fast as I can? That's my goal. Because I work so hard at what I'm doing, I know what those dates are. I know how much time that more likely I'll serve on the inside. That allows me to plan for the future. And that's what I do. I look at this. It's unfortunate that all of us are going through this, but it's not the end. And I just say over and over, which is their teachings, self-advocacy is everything. As soon as I put my hands back on the steering wheel, instead of letting my attorney and everyone else kind of drive me where they wanted to take me, as soon as I took back control of my life, it allowed me then to put my life back together.
One more topic, Ron. There are some people, Scott and I had this call last week. Someone called us and said, I will hire your team if you can assure me this and this and that. And that's asking us to predict the future. And if I could predict the future, I'd probably be in a different business. And I know people are so fixated on getting the shortest sentence and getting out, but something that we have discussed previously, I know you got 6 years when the government wanted 14, but even if you got 14, we discussed there was still dignity in doing the work and setting the right example for your son, an All-American football player, that even through crisis you can lead. So all of you, I know you want the shortest sentence. I know you want to get out of prison as quickly as possible. For some it happens, for some it does not. But in your case, Ron, even if you got the 14 years, isn't there dignity in having done everything you possibly could to change the narrative?
I could have said it better. Yes. Matter of fact, when it first came out with the sentencing recommendations, which you really don't know what those are until you go through the pre-sentence report process. But, people around me thought, well, you're going to be looking at maybe 5 years, 4 years. And these were uneducated guesses. So when it came out in my pre-sentence report that the government was asking for 14 years, that was a setback. Even though I'd been optimistic, I thought, like a lot of us do initially, my life's over. But again, then when I grasped the things I could do, even looking at 14 years, I started to say to myself, I can manage this. I can get through this. I can turn this 14 years into 8, maybe 7, depending on how hard I work. And that's the mindset you have to do. And then when you start advocating and all the options that you have out there, from release plans to your character letters to the RDAP programs, everything that's out there for you to do only makes your opportunity to get out quicker, easier. So there's no fast solution. I have a pretty good time set in my mind when I think that I'll be released. If I don't hit that, that's fine. But I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do everything I can do to come home. It's not going to be my priority. I'm not going to walk into my first team meeting and hand him a 20, 30 page release plan and have them think that, you just got here 2 weeks ago and now you're handing me a release plan to get out. I'll use the strategies that I've learned in our groups and the advice from the people who've gotten out, and there's life after this. We can self-advocate for ourselves.
Thank you, Ron, for contributing. It was wonderful to spend time with you. Let's transition to a few more stories, and then I want to get into some preparations for prison along with some horror stories we're hearing. To that end, our friend Andy, good to see you, was sentenced yesterday. Andy, can you give us an update on the sentencing hearing and how you're feeling a day later?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts going through my head. It's a little hard to maintain a train of thought for me. Just so everybody has some context, I am an oral surgeon. I got myself addicted to pain medication because of a herniated disc. I took pain medication from my office, and nobody suspected anything. For those of you who've dealt with addiction, I'm sure you are aware that even with some addiction that can be ugly, a lot of people function very well and hide it very well. And I certainly did that. But eventually I was just sick of where I was at. And I kind of left some clues that could be seen. And so I as a licensed healthcare provider, we've got a board, and they have a mechanism for saying, hey, I need help. I did that. I told what I was doing. I thought by doing that, I would kind of be protected from legal problems, because a lot of times that is how it works. If you are upfront and seek help, you get help, and there's no criminal problems. But sometimes there are. And all of this for me, I self-reported almost 4 years ago. So it's been a long journey. And I found out in the fall that they were pursuing criminal charges against me. There was no point in going to trial because I had confessed everything that I had done. So I found out, that I could be looking at, well, in theory, 5 to 10 years. I think that's very typical for felony charges. But once my pre-sentencing report was done, I realized that I could face 41 to 51 months in prison. And, as someone who has, like, I'm sure many of you, none of us want to end up on this call in these situations. It's unimaginable, even now. But you've got to face reality, and I'm just so thankful that I saw your article in the New York Times, Justin, because that's how I found you guys. And having some frames of reference, some people who have been through this is just invaluable. I know that your guidance for my pre-sentencing report interview, the letter I submitted to the judge, my character letters, all of that, I think was very positively impacted by you guys. And so the hearing yesterday, I pled guilty in October, so it's been months of dread. And yesterday, people ended up there who I didn't expect to be there, like one of my partners, some nurses from my office. Of course, my family was there. And it's just surreal. The judge, for a good part of the trial, the sentencing, I felt like I was very likely going to be getting 30 to 36 months. It was just hard to hear, but everything that she said was fair. And I was very happy, frankly. I feel that there was some justice and honestly some mercy when you look at the big picture, that I was sentenced to 24 months.
Well, we discussed that yesterday a little bit, Andy. For everyone, the sentencing day can be easier than the guilty plea, because at least you get some clarity. And now with the drug program and good time, we've had no guarantee that it will happen, but there's been myriad people in our community on a 24-month sentence who have served 9 or 10 months in federal prison, or 11 months. You just need to complete the program, get into it as quickly as possible, avoid problems, and that's what we're going to transition to. So, Andy, we're grateful that you're in our community, that you're sharing this story, and of course, we'll be here to continue to support you. To that end, part of the reason you can get a shorter sentence and get out early is by way of avoiding problems. So part of what our team wants to encourage you to do is understand how every decision you make on the inside can really influence your life. So for example, a little bit earlier, I shared that story about a daughter who called crying because her mom got caught with an iPhone in federal prison. I had filmed that actually right before I had dinner with Ron in Georgia. And the consequences of that, of course, follow. Is anyone here actually, who's been to prison and who's home from prison? I know Scott Brown is. Scott Laney, can someone articulate the consequences of a disciplinary? Scott Brown, so valuable to our team. Can you articulate, Scott, some of the collateral consequences of getting caught with an iPhone or disciplinary infraction in prison?
Well, I think the biggest thing is it draws attention to yourself, which is something that you in general want to avoid. My rule was to try to stay as invisible as possible, except when I was going into my unit team meetings. But if you're caught with a cell phone, you're going to get a disciplinary infraction. You're probably going to be sent to the hole or the shoe. You may get sent to a different prison. Your security level may go up. You may go from a camp to a low.
It's endless. So someone called me who served time at Sheridan prison camp, and he went there specifically for the drug program. He told me that 90% of, it seems like a big number, but he said 90% of people there have a phone or access to a phone at any time. And many don't get caught, of course, when you do. And it's so easy to find out if you've been using the phone because they track it against your approved phone list. And just like that, it's game over. In this instance, this mother is still in the hole. So about 45 days later, She lost the year off for the drug program. And then what happens at times is they give you an ultimatum, and this can be very uncomfortable. How would you respond? You're in a terrible predicament if they come into you while you're in the hole and they say, how would you like to help yourself? Yes, I'd like to help myself. I'd like to get the year back. And this is what happened. I'd like to get the year back. I'd love to leave the hole because I look like a ghost. We'd love for you to tell us where you got the iPhone from, how this whole thing originated. Can you help us? That would help you and it would help us. How should someone like that respond? How do you think she responded? Ron, you're going to prison for 6 years, or, Scott Laney, you've been there. Scott, what happens in a situation like that? What type of predicament does that put that person in?
I mean, one of the big things, of the many things I learned from RDAP, is you need to not put yourself in that position, right? You would have a disastrous time, even in a federal prison camp, I think, after having told on someone like that. So that the better choice is to not use it ahead of time. And like many of you have shared, they're everywhere. And the easiest thing is you can't be on point 99% of the time, because that one time is all it takes. So just avoid it completely. So
it was a difficult solution or choice for her, and she chose to say nothing. And the result of that is she doesn't then would be considered an informant, which could lead to problems inside of the camp. But the consequence, of course, is she is going to lose the good time. She may get transferred. As Bart mentioned, there could be a new charge. People are indeed getting written up for charges. And now she's seen as not being cooperative or not helping the institution enforce policy by not sharing details on where she got the phone. So she has a very long journey ahead of her. And unfortunately, it's harder for her family. Now, by the way, if anyone has questions, please add them along the right side and our team will respond. What I'd like to do now is transition into some tips that we have for surrendering to prison. And to do that, I'm going to rely on our trusted screen share. And I know some of you are home from prison, of course. So if you have insights that you can share, we'd be grateful to hear them. If you think there's something we're leaving out or missing, and we're also going to talk about Scott Carper's newsletter. Something that we encourage all of you to do before you go to federal prison is get ready to document the journey. Ron, you mentioned that you may not go in with, you're going to go in with a release plan, but it's something you may not plan to immediately give to your case manager. Everyone has a different strategy. But as I understand it from our dinner in Atlanta, you are preparing to document the journey and share that with stakeholders. Is that accurate?
I am. I've elected, besides being well into my release plan, I almost have it complete. And I also intend to do a blog or a website. I've decided not to start sharing that information until I actually go inside. I just felt that was prudent for me. And then the advice on not going in with the release plan day one actually came from somebody in our community who made a good point. You know what? I just didn't feel comfortable, or I did. Actually, they did. They went in and handed their release plan very first meeting and didn't get a very positive response. And that makes sense to me. You have to be smart. You have to strategize in what you're doing, just like we do in business.
So part of what Ron said, I think, is important. All of you are successful executives. You've made money, you've lost money, you've done business deals. We've all had ups and downs throughout business. A big part of what our team encourages you to do is to exercise and use your own judgment. We may suggest something based on our experience or what we've learned from a subject matter expert, but that doesn't mean that you may say, I agree with that, but I'm going to go about it differently. I'm not going to do it in the first team meeting. I'm going to wait. We want you to use your own judgment. Some people choose to document their journey and build it out before sentencing, after sentencing, and surrender to prison with it. Others do not. For example, Mr. Carper's son, Scott, writes a newsletter every week from Leavenworth in Kansas. And in his most recent newsletter, he shares the story of a prisoner. And here's exactly what Scott wrote in his newsletter. The inmate said, "Hello, sir. I'm here to update you on my progress and turn in a release plan." The case manager's exact response: "Get the F out of my office. No, I will not take that reentry plan." Certainly frustrating if you invest the time to create a plan and then you get the blow off from your case manager. But as Mr. Carper and I discussed before we went live, that doesn't mean you stop creating it and stop documenting it. It might not have influenced that case manager, but it doesn't mean it might not influence the warden or your eventual probation officer. You don't want don't want your happiness or your prison routine to be contingent on how a staff member responds to work that you create. So as you get ready to go to prison, our team encourages you to use our resources to create this reentry plan and get creative and have fun with it. Build into your release plan that you contribute to these webinars every week to learn from justice impacted people, to learn strategies, to offer advice. But you should get creative in that content. And while unfortunately this person in Leavenworth got a very bad response to his release plan, on the flip side, if you can see my screen, I get an email from, can you see my scene, Scott, the message from Tracy? So this is an email from Tracy Hatsuna. I did a YouTube video with her last week. She just surrendered to federal prison for 51 months with her release plan. She got a different response. I shared my release plan with my case manager. She liked it and asked that I share the idea with others. I sent a cop out to the reentry coordinator, and I'd love to start teaching people how to map out their plans to maximize benefits and all capabilities. What are your thoughts on this? My response was, that is fantastic. Keep it up. Go teach the course. Everyone is going to get differing opinions and ideas because case managers are human beings. Some might be more reform-minded based on the input of the new director. Some might be more punitive. You're an inmate, get out of my office. Regardless, you continue to do the work. But I love what Ron said. He's heard varying opinions. He's going to use his own judgment as an executive, and he's got to own that, and he will own that. But it doesn't change if you're getting ready to go to prison. Our team encourages you to write. There's very little value in these videos. I say this a lot in our YouTube videos as well. These videos or webinars, if there isn't a clearly defined action plan, if not, I'm just a talking head for an hour and you get on with your day and you retain nothing. So there should be some action plan from these webinars. And if you're going to prison, or if you have a loved one in prison and they're not documenting the journey enough, I would encourage you or encourage them, prepare to document the journey, because so many of you don't agree with the government's version of events, don't agree with the plea agreement, outsource the work in a passive mode to your lawyer, and lawyers aren't not even involved in the process in prison. And as a federal judge told us at a sentencing hearing, I think all you guys are full of happy talk. You tell me what I want to hear. There's no plan. There's no action. You're telling me what I want to hear. How do I even know if I can believe you? They're just words. Without a plan, documenting it, you're really not prepared for federal prison. There are myriad ways to document it through core links every single week. Send an email. Ron mentioned a website where he will be documenting his journey. Glenn Hudson, someone in our community, is documenting his journey extensively through his time at Montgomery. Scott did that, of course. So there's a website, there's blogs, there's newsletters, good old snail mail if you don't want to use that email. Regardless, you should be creating content and sharing it with people who have a vested interest in your future, including your eventual probation officer. That's right. If you're going to prison, or if you have a loved one in prison, a takeaway from our webinar today should be, ask your loved one, are you writing your probation officer? Are you sharing your release plan or letters? I know by doing that, it changed the game for me when I met my probation officer, Isaiah Murrow, in the halfway house in Hollywood on May 22nd, 2009, 2 days after I was released from prison. And by the way, it's not that hard to write, especially if you haven't yet to go to prison. Many people like me, I think, are better communicators than writers. Talking to your iPhone for 2 or 3 minutes, before you know it, you got a damn book 30 days later. And like Ron said, you can build your website and document it. Just keep everything in draft mode. I encouraged Andy when he was sentenced yesterday, document it, write it out, because you will always see things differently in the future. Your surrender to prison will feel differently a week or 2 weeks later than when you're actually going through that strip search. So write it out and document it and share it. The second point we want you to focus on is establishing a primary point of contact, because unfortunately, some things can pop up while you're in prison. Can Scott Laney or someone in our community who's been to prison, can you articulate perhaps the value of why someone would need a primary point of contact? And then I'll chime in as well.
I can't imagine what the journey would have been like had I not had a supportive family and people who could help me with things on the outside. And this isn't someone who just off the cuff offers to help if you need anything. There are more things that will come up, and you will have very little control while you're in there. So having someone whom you trust, especially someone who you have given power of attorney to, can make your time inside there much more manageable when you're not stressing out about things that you can't solve because you don't have a primary point of contact who can help you.
That's right. Additionally, when I surrendered, they asked me for a primary point of contact. I remember thinking like, why? Was something going to happen to me? I gave them a name and it was my mom. And it was helpful to have that primary point of contact. All of you need it because unfortunately some things can pop up while you're in custody. Recently, someone in our community, their father passed away. And that person was able to try to work with their loved one to get a furlough to attend the funeral. And that person was able to find the policy that could be submitted to request a furlough. Also, it's helpful to have someone coordinate your visits. You only have so many phone minutes. I guess right now it might still be unlimited, but to have someone manage that. Also, financial issues might pop up, lawsuits may come, and to have someone handle your taxes and lawsuits and issues, it just shows good planning on your end. So we encourage you before you go in to have someone as your primary point of contact. I see hands coming up. I'm happy to engage. Please tell me where the hands are. We have a lot of people on here. Yes, Steve and Jean, I see you in the top left. What is your question? Then I'll come to Jesse.
The only thing there was two things, but I'll just do the one right now, is from your book about liquidating assets. To me, I was like, oh, we'll just leave all that right there. You know, my best friend works at the financial office where our assets are managed. She's going to have our power of attorney. But I'm like, after reading your book, I'm like, liquidate, because if the market goes bad while we're in, she could have her authority taken away like what happened to you. So that was very powerful for me.
Thank you for bringing up that traumatic moment in my life after I went to prison. So what happened is after I went to prison, 8 days later, Merrill Lynch froze my account because I was in prison. I called my broker from prison. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, they froze your money. You're in jail. We don't know what to do. I'm like, sell everything. He's like, we can't. I'm like, what do you mean sell it? He's like, you're in prison. They froze it. And of course, between April of 2008 and May 2009, a recession I chose to sit out while I was in prison, the market went down like 50%, and so did my portfolio because it was frozen. Even though I eventually got a power of attorney, they wouldn't let that person, they wouldn't let us liquidate. So if a power of attorney can help you find a new broker if you get fired, and I know so many of you get fired every week. We get a call from someone that was fired from their brokerage firm. That power of attorney can help you find a new broker, liquidate if necessary. So I'm no longer a financial advisor. However, if I would argue, if you're young and you don't need the money for 10 or 20 years, I wouldn't liquidate, even if it's in stocks. But if it's money that you may need to live, that money shouldn't be in the stock market anyway, if it's assets that you need on the shorter term. But you certainly need someone on the outside to help manage that, because you really feel imprisoned when you can't manage your financial affairs. And getting these financial affairs in order are essential, including as you prepare to go to prison. How much are you planning to spend every single month? Scott, Elaine, and I can tell you there are guys that spend $1,000 a month. There are some multimillionaires who spend $100 a month and find value, live in a very minimalist lifestyle. But you need to create a budget for yourself while understanding they are going to be taking more restitution payments in prison. It's going to go from voluntary to mandatory for myriad reasons, and they have begun to take larger sums. So for those of you who owe money, understand that they're going to take payments. I would encourage you to let them take the payment. I received a call a few weeks ago from someone who, because they didn't want to pay more, the wife calls. The husband didn't want to pay more. He then has money go to other people's books. So Scott, or can you articulate or share what you think his wife does? Well, I'll just say it. After every single visit, the wife meets people in the parking lot and she starts Venmoing them money because the husband has money, $50 to this guy, $80 to that guy, $100. He's got a whole racket going on because the less money he has on his books, the less they can take. So it goes elsewhere. A lot of guys do it. Some get caught, some do not. But I would ask all of you, is that in the best interest of your wife to meet people in the parking lot, to be Venmoing them money? And it sounds crazy. And a lot of people say, I would never do that. Yet those are the same people like me who say, I will never get into trouble or go to federal prison. Put your family first. And if that means you need to spend $300 a month, endure, okay, please. But you cannot get into trouble, lose good time, go to the hole, and then it goes from bad to worse. And guess what? You end up staying in prison longer, which costs you more money because your family's sending you money and you ain't home working. Please. Jesse in the top left, I see your hand up. Talk to me.
Yeah, this is in regards to surrendering. They say you guys had mentioned to make a copy of your ID, social security card, all that good stuff. I guess it's a simple question, but I guess a really good question. Should we make copies of everything on one page of paper or individually, like one piece of paper for my ID, piece of paper for my social, paper for my certificate, or how does that work exactly? Can they all be on the same page? Is what I'm asking.
I've never been asked that. I would presume they could all be on the same page. People who create their release plan will also build in their ID and like insurance information and some supporting documentation on one page on the release plan. So I'm sure it's totally fine that you're able to do that. Also, as you prepare to surrender and you create your budget, any medications that you need, you should take with you, ensure they're documented in the probation report. Someone recently, unfortunately, had some health issues post-sentencing, and that person was able to get their probation report amended to reflect these health issues, because that really is the Bible or the gold standard in prison. By the way, that same person also got their personal narrative amended and added to the probation report. So all of you, even if your PSR is done, or if you have yet to do it, of course, you should get your narrative in there, according to what judges tell us. But even if you've been not yet sentenced, you can try to get your narrative into the probation report. But some people in our community have had their PSRs amended with approval from the judge, and they get additional information in there. That could be a letter from a substance abuse counselor, your narrative of health issues. So Jesse, forgive me for rambling on. I'm sure it's all fine on one piece of paper. To mail in federal prison, I would wait till you get there to understand the policy. Again, it's subjective, like one case manager likes the release plan, another does not. It could be subjective with mail and how much they let you get in. So once you get there, you'll learn, and I would share that with your community.
Yeah, that was also other part of the question too, is like you were saying, some of them don't like to get the release plan up front. But you could take that in there with you, right? And no one's going to take it away from you.
So here's our response. Expect resistance. Okay. We want to hope for the best, but you can expect resistance. Jennifer Shaw, the reality star who was in our community, surrendered with her release plan. They didn't let her take it. Big deal. Her husband, Sharif, mailed it to her that morning. She had it the next day. We got a similar message from Jen, and I'll do this in a YouTube video. They love her release plan. They love it so much. In fact, she got a job in education where she is teaching her release plan course. All is organized, all our plan. It was not by accident. So if they don't let you take it in, who cares? Mail it to yourself. If they don't let you take your contact list in, who cares? Mail it to yourself. By this point in our journey, we've endured so much: a government investigation, sentencing, indictment, reputational fallout. It's like, you get to a point where none of it should really matter anymore. There are some people who freak out. They didn't let me bring in my release plan. Who cares? Put it in the mail. You'll get it the next day. It should be dirt off your shoulder at this point. So try to bring it. If they put it in the round file, awesome. Mail it to yourself. Linda, I see your hand was up.
Spirit.
Linda, you're still on mute. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I figured it out. I just wanted to mention too, you had said about financial preparedness. This is more for people that are certainly in short-term situations, but for example, if you have a home equity loan and you're preparing, that you have some kind of an automatic withdrawal so that it's covered during the time you're out. What happened to me is I thought I had more than enough money, and which I luckily did because I got out faster than I thought. But interest rates doubled. So my $700 home equity loan suddenly is $1,200. I would just urge, I'm sorry. Hold on.
While Linda's.
I would just urge everybody, make sure that you basically take worst case scenario and then probably double it if you want to cover expenses, that you're covering while you're inside. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. To the home equity line, Linda, I know you messaged you have a good story to tell. We'll share some good news to share. We'll do that at the end. To the home equity line, by the way, that's another point on the financial planning. I would say I can think of 10 people, including myself, where the bank freezes the equity line once you're in prison. So that happened with me. And I don't know if I put that in Lessons from Prison with Michael, but I had access to more money. I probably should have taken it because I needed it. Instead, they cut off. I wasn't allowed to take another penny. Thankfully, they didn't call the loan, which they could do because I was on time. So B of A both fired me. They didn't call in the equity line, but they cut off my ability to get any more to get any more credit. And thankfully, Citibank didn't do that, because the only way I really sustained myself coming home was because of that Citi card, because I had no more cash thanks to restitution and the lawyers. So again, this is part of the financial planning we want you to go through. That's a very good point. Linda, I appreciate you sharing that.
Okay,
Any,
I'll mute again.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. And any other questions any other hands up as we transition? Joanne, very good to see you. Joanne mentioned was self-surrendering, bring prescribed medication, extra glasses, dental devices, COVID vax card. My son didn't bring vax card and was quarantined for 10 days, where we heard nothing from him. So yes, quarantining still exists. You want to be prepared. Besides planning to document the journey, you want to come with these essentials that will help you. Also, I'd encourage you, Ron, this goes to you as well, see the dentist one last time, because on a scale of 1 to 10, the healthcare, well, the dental, I want to be polite here, just see the dentist one more time before you go in, because you're going to get on the waiting list for a teeth cleaning. I was released before they ever saw me. Go ahead, Ron.
Are you trying to tell me something?
No, you have
just saw
very
me
good
a week
breath. You
ago.
have very good hygiene. It was good to see you. I'm just encouraging
I'm
you
kidding.
one more time. Go to the dentist one more time, please. Okay. So now okay, let me come back to our tips here. So we have documenting the journey by way of the release plan or blog or a newsletter, whatever's best for you. Always use your own judgment. We put it out there. You got to own it. You got to do it. It's your life. As long as you accept responsibility for it, we'll support you. We have the primary point of contact. We've just covered number 3, understanding financial implications. And as we know, they can be severe, which is why we want the power of attorney. If you want to liquidate assets, you should expect at some point to get fired. To the financial implications, we discussed how much you want to spend every single month. Michael, I think some months was spending like $1,000 a month, of course, because he would write books via core links and it's 5 cents a minute. But I would encourage all of you to go through a budget, but also you need to understand how long you will actually serve based on your sentence. People have unrealistic expectations, or they don't give themselves enough credit for how long they will actually serve. So someone in our community, Matt, who's not with us today because he's at his TDAP meeting at the halfway house in Newark, on a 51-month sentence, it wasn't 51 months. He was home in about 17 months. Scott got 42 months. He was home in about 13 months. You want to budget and plan exactly what that will cost. Now, do not send the money to yourself at once, which is what my good friend Mohammed did in federal prison. He was there for 10 months. He sent in $5 grand thinking it would cover the 10 months. And our case manager took 4,000 of it towards restitution. Okay, these things happen. I know there's someone in our community where they take $180 a month because despite the advice that we give, he surrendered with all of the money, thinking that he didn't want to inconvenience his family. Now he's inconveniencing them because he needs more money because they take so much every month. So spread it out a little bit, but give real insights to what you plan to spend every single month. And of course, some people spend much more than they plan because they gamble, they lose, they have money going to other people's books. They really want a life of, they want all the benefits that accompany life in federal prison. If you choose that, fine. I just want you to understand some of the collateral consequences that can accompany that process. Unfortunately, I share stories every now and again where a spouse or sibling may call and say, I had a very terrible visit with my loved one, and I'm not going to go back for a while. And I'll say, well, why? And they'll say, well, I tried to encourage or ask my loved one what they do all day in prison, and they got very angry. And their response is, well, I'm in prison. There's nothing that I can do here. Of course, that's not our message. And it leads to some frustrations and fighting within the family. If you're going to visit with your family, if you're going to call home, if we encourage you to document and to be able to share with them what you are actually doing while in prison. If not, even though you could have 8 hours together in a visit, after about 30 minutes, you're going to look at the clock and say, okay, good to see you. I'll see you in 3 weeks. If you have nothing to discuss and to review, no future plans to go through together, then you're really missing opportunities. And one ways that people can engage with their family is by creating a deliberate reading list. And I know, Scott, we've addressed it. I want to address it again. If you would summarize the value of, and I know Ron's going to do this as well, but Scott, can you address your deliberate reading list and how that was beneficial to your time in prison, and how perhaps your parent, your dad Herb, and others in your community were more connected with you by virtue of your deliberate reading list?
Sure. I really enjoyed not just picking up random books and reading to waste time or to burn through time, but to be very intentional and deliberate surrounding the books I was choosing and how they would help me now, how they would help me upon my release, how they could change my perspective on life. As many of you who've seen my website may have noticed, I wrote reports on every book, and as friends and family were following along, they started reading those books with me, and it changed the scope of our visits, right? Because instead of sitting in a somewhat sterile prison visiting room, talking about the same things again and again every month, we had conversations about philosophy, about history, about the books that we were both reading together. It was a really, really enjoyable way for us to connect. And it made my time feel exceptionally productive instead of like I was just twiddling my thumbs waiting for the calendar pages to turn.
So I will tell you, our goal on these webinars is to give you everything for free. It's not to sell you a website. Some work with our team, some go to Fiverr and get it made for $50. Whatever you do, document it. Here's an example. Here's Glenn Hudson. So here's Glenn, his beautiful family. Glenn, of course, is a former boxer, lives in Arkansas. He's currently at Montgomery. Ron, you should meet, he'll be on the lookout for you. And look at how Glenn is documenting his journey. Now, he did this site through our team, and he sends the blogs to us, and we post them and do the images and all that good stuff. But he has people following him. He's sharing it. He's writing book reports. He wrote a wonderful book report about earning freedom, Michael's book, and books that I've suggested he read. So he's been incredibly productive while in prison. And I can assure you, Amber and his kids miss their husband like crazy. They miss him to death. You have no idea how much they miss their father. He's a wonderful father and husband. But they're so proud of him because they're connected with him. When they visit, they discuss it. They're reading books together. He's building a library that he says will improve his legacy when his kids grow older, and he can share what his father did while he was in prison, that he didn't waste a moment. So whether it's a website, a newsletter, or whatever it is, you've got to do it. Because if you don't, those visits in federal prison can be difficult if you don't have anything to review and discuss together. Those are my insights. Of course, not everyone agrees. While we're going through this, I do want to answer some questions that are coming along the right side. For example, do people have access to the internet when in prison? The answer is no, though of course you'll see it because people you'll see iPhones, you'll see iPads and things of that nature. Recently, someone called to say that they're now seeing drones over the prison. So a drone will come and drop off food and drugs and iPhones. And, these minimum security camps, it's kind of like the Wild Wild West. There could be one guard for 125 or 150 prisoners. And that track is pretty large, and there's a lot of room. So you have a drone come and drop it. Someone comes and buries it. Eventually someone is going to come and pick it up and then sell it, right? So there will be access to the internet, but of course that would be a disciplinary infraction. And people have asked, how do I avoid that? I would encourage you to read Earning Freedom, Michael's book. Where in that book, while he was in the penitentiary for 8 years, he talks about creating a routine that kept him away from as much trouble as possible. What did that mean? He didn't go to the chow hall. He found a job at Suicide Watch from midnight to 6 or 7 in the morning, where he would do his study and coursework while working on the suicide wing, which meant perhaps he could sleep during the day when he wasn't in the chow hall. He would exercise by himself. So I'm encouraging all of you, to the extent that you can find time alone or create a routine where you are avoiding problems, you then increase your chances of avoiding problems. But a lot of people don't understand that. And they form friendships too quickly, and they form a friendship with someone who has access to the internet by way of an iPhone, and problems can follow. It can really derail your routine. Someone said, I was told the guards are the ones bringing in the cell phone. There's some truth to that, unfortunately. A guard a week, I think I've read, gets arrested in America. 25 or 30 guards over the years have reached out to our team to learn more. Many of them, frankly, say the same thing. I was kind of manipulated or taken in by something like that. They still kind of speak like a guard, even though they're soon to be inmate. I always found that to be interesting. But guards can bring them in without question, but also people can find a way to get them in as well, including through visitation. There are some spots where you come in to visit, they may not search you. When I went to visit, I was strip searched every single time. But there are some prisons like the one in Arizona where someone got in with a gun and tried to kill someone in the camp where there wasn't a strip search. So what I've learned, if you want something bad enough, you tend to find a way. That's why you're going to see so many of these phones on the inside. Any other questions that I'm missing as we go through this? Let's see, I'm going to go along the right side here. Scott commented, there are prison computers with a secure email system. That's correct. Okay, so let's get back to our top 5. We're going to cover the top 5 today. And then Chris, are you still with us? I want to transition to someone in our community who just got sentenced a few minutes ago. Okay. So number 5. Oh, and by the way, it's a good idea before you go in, of course, to establish your reading list. Okay. And then share that. And I'd also encourage you to build it into your release plan. As you prepare to go to federal prison, I would also give thought to what type of job you want in prison. Some of you can find a job that's 45 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day. Others can find a job that's 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day. Can somebody who's been to prison express why someone who might not even need the money would want a job that's 8 or 9 hours a day versus someone like me who wanted a job that was 30 minutes a day? Anyone?
If you're going to be in for a while, they do have some apprenticeship programs that some people can find valuable. That would be one reason. Also, some people think that if they have several jobs, it passes the time. I was of the 30-minute a day, but I joined the construction crew and I pretty much got what I wanted.
So that's really the right answer. There are some people who might not need the money, yet who find prison so boring that they will work for 8 or 9 hours a day to help the time pass. And they don't feel like they're in prison. They may do what's called the out crew, where you can leave the prison and come back to the prison. In fact, there's this ridiculous article written years ago on CNBC that talks about the top 10 prisons in America, written by someone who didn't go to federal prison, of course. And the person articulates that Montgomery is a great prison, or Pensacola is a great prison, because you can be the town driver for the warden and you get extra cookies if you go. There's some truth to that. Some people will be the town driver or do the out crew because they'll feed you McDonald's or barbecue, and you may make a little bit more money. I'm not dismissing making more money if you need it. That's why some people do unicorn, make $150 a month. But if you're in a position where you need to rebuild your career and brand and make money, and if you're starting over like so many people, I know I was starting over, I'd encourage you to look for work where you're doing your job, but you find a job that's maybe an hour or 2 a day, which leaves more time to build your new career and write, like Scott Carper is doing, or like Glenn is doing, or Ron is doing, or Scott did. If not, the time might go easier if you're working 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day, but then there could be problems waiting for you on the other side. So that's a big part of the reason you should be thinking, well, what type of job do you want? And you should be looking for that job as soon as you hit the compound, before you get assigned a job. Scott, how quickly do you get assigned a job in prison? What is it after? How long till you get assigned a job typically?
Once I was released from quarantine, I was in the kitchen within 24 hours because I made the mistake of not finding a job soon enough. So we talk a lot about you need to advocate for yourself. You need to do that at every point in the process. And I think one thing I recommend for anyone surrendering to a federal prison is go talk to the other inmates, find a job that you think fits well with your desires and how you want to use your time, and submit a cop out and try and secure that job instead of sitting back. In hindsight, though, I enjoyed the kitchen because I met a lot of other people. It just wasn't the way that I wanted to spend my time, was working 7 hours per day.
Ron, when you get to Montgomery, before you get assigned a job or you clear A&O, where you go through some classes and whatnot. By the way, I think Prison Professors nonprofit courses that Michael is creating, I believe, is now doing A&O inside of some federal prisons, which is super cool. And Michael's continued to tour prisons all across the country. He was recently in Yankton, where he saw a bunch of people in our community. So there's a very good chance that when you're in prison, you will see Michael Santos, who will go to prison to both train staff and prisoners. And we're continuing to work on reform. We want work furloughs where you can leave the prison and go back. We want to try to bring back parole, where if you get 5 years, after a year, you go in front of a parole board to show why you're worthy of an earlier release. We're all about reform and changing the system. So there's a chance if you're in prison, you'll get a chance to hear Michael speak. But Ron, back to you. Once you surrender, before you get cleared for work within 2 weeks, I would do what like Jennifer Shaw did. go to education, right? And find out if there's an opening. Say you want to teach a course and there may be an opening there. The worst they can say is no, right?
I agree.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
when I went to prison, I tried to find a job in recreation, checking out tennis balls, and my case manager said, she laughed. She was really very nice. She's like, "You've got to be kidding me. You're young, you're healthy, you're going to the kitchen like every new prisoner for 120 days." But Michael Santos then said, "Did you know there's a long-term prisoner who assigns jobs in the kitchen? So why don't you go to him?" And his name was Baker. "Why don't you find out the best of the worst jobs in the kitchen?" So I went to Baker, and he said, "There's 4 things. You could be a baker at 4:30 in the morning. You can do pots and pans, lunch or dinner, and you can do the buffet line 3 times a day." And I knew I wanted a job that was the least amount of time. I knew I wanted to exercise in the morning, get that over with, because it was so hot where I served time, so hot they would close the compound. So I said, okay, I'll take the pots and pans, lunch and dinner. Better than, I didn't want to serve food 3 times a day or get up at 4 a.m. to be a baker. So be proactive. The worst they can say is no, but I'm pleasantly surprised how many people have been able to work in education and teach this release plan course. And there's going to be more of it because things are beginning to trickle down from the top with Colette Peters, the director of the training. The release plan is going to be ubiquitous in federal prisons soon enough, in part because of our work. We want you to get on the train and teach it, and then share that work with your case manager and your release plan.
By the way, some of Michael's courses too, just for people, you can find them in the library at some of the prisons as well, already recorded, because I did one with him. For some of those who might be interested in doing a course with Michael, it's very proactive, and it made an impact, by the way, with my judge during my sentencing.
That's right. What Ron's mentioning is Michael creates content with people in our community, like Ron, like Scott, like Matt, like Kent, where that work then becomes part of the prison syllabus. So hundreds of thousands of people in prisons and jails will go through Ron's program, Scott's program, Kent's program. They may never meet these prisoners, but they're benefiting, contributing, and giving back. And really, it's a way to leverage off the 26 years that Michael served in prison by creating content that influences so many people. So that's a great point. Ron, in addition to trying to teach you should teach your course. It's a great course. Hundreds of thousands of people are already benefiting from your course. This is being proactive rather than just waiting for them to assign you a job. The worst they can say is no, you're going to the kitchen. And if they do what Ron or Scott says, it's all good, it's all fine. I want to prepare, I'm coming home, right? That's the mindset. No complaining. They expect some resistance, some complaining. The less you do that, the more stoical you are, the more you tend to get what it is you want. It's kind of the way the system works. Okay. Keep all of that in mind.
Justin, can
yes,
I jump in with something?
You, of course.
At my prison, we also had vocational programs that you could join in lieu of a job. Horticulture, welding. I took part in the horticulture class. So every day we would go out. They had a huge greenhouse. We had little fields in the back. We were growing fresh fruits and vegetables, which were a treat because we got to eat them while we were out there. So that's another opportunity. It counts as a job, but maybe something where you can learn a new skill, learn more about stuff. And it was very cathartic to be out there with plants and growing things and kind of away from the mayhem of the main prison camp.
That's exactly right. I will tell you, the highest value inside of these prison camps is boredom. Very little violence. It happens every now and again. It's boredom. And some dudes waiting for mail call. It's like watching paint dry. Email goes down, they freak out. TV's down, they freak out. They're letting others kind of determine their happiness and their plans. So it does require an ability for you to be focused. But I'm telling you, you're going to think of this. You're going to be in prison. It's going to be Tuesday at 12:30 in the afternoon, and you're going to be thinking, why am I in prison? What a terrible waste of taxpayer resources that I'm here. If I owe money, shouldn't I be working and paying it back? Isn't that what's really best for my victim? I'm going to film a YouTube video where I got some calls from victims calling to yell at me on behalf of some of our clients. And they're angry at the way that you can live in federal prison. They're mad that Ron's going to be able to write a book, build his brand, connect with his son, get healthier, and come home and crush it. As if we created the American correctional system in this country. I think it was the Quakers more than 2 centuries ago who gave thought to corrections. We didn't create it. It's like, don't hate the player, hate the game. We're doing the best that we can with the system that exists. So you'll never be able to get everyone back into your corner. But these victims, and this happened with Jen Shaw, they're like, wait a second, she could be on TV right now making money and paying us back, but she's knitting and teaching a class in prison for 6.5 years. How is that in the interest of anyone? And my response is, you should join our webinar. You're exactly right. It's a waste of money. You need your money back. The point is, it might not be that productive for everyone. Not everyone is Jen Shaw or Ron or Scott Laney. Some people are going to watch the Kardashians all day and claim that this is the worst experience of their life. It's your choice. Whatever you choose to do, we want you to make the right choice, because this eventually is ending. Linda, I'll come to you in 1 second. I want to go through the last one. This all hinges around the last one here. Is we continue to create a journaling and writing plan. And this really comes back to number 4. If you say you're going to write and journal, if you're not reading good books and documenting it, people are eventually going to get worn out with the content that you produce. You can see Donald Carper's son, Scott, who writes a newsletter every Monday in Leavenworth. You can see Scott's productivity and what he's done the prior week, because he's reading and learning and documenting it. If he wasn't reading and learning, it would be the same newsletter every week and nobody would want to read it. That much I can tell you. Okay, so it's 10:57. I'm Linda, I'll come to you in a moment. Do we have Chris with us on the line? We might have lost him. He just got sentenced earlier. He may still be at the courthouse. That Chris Taylor, if you're not there, that's totally okay. How about Hugo? Hugo, are you with us?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so we'll be brief, Hugo. Hugo Mejia, by the way, is an old friend who was featured heavily in that New York Times article. He's in the halfway house now. Hugo, let's just do this in a few minutes because we're running out of time. So great to see you. Welcome home. Can you give us a quick summary of your sentence, where you served time, how long you served, and why that experience was so productive?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Really quickly, as Justin Napoli pointed out, I actually was very fortunate. I have very little to complain about overall. I'm currently at a halfway house right now, hence why I don't have a video. They're not allowed, you're not allowed to film in here, but I've been at this halfway house for about looking at 6 weeks now. I was in Sheridan, from California. I was in Sheridan, Portland, for approximately 10 months on a 36-month sentence. I did do RDAP. I only got 9 months for RDAP, but because of some of the tools, obviously, that I learned from Justin and other things as well, I was able to get out of that camp situation in just under 10 months. So far it's been good. There have been some frustrating situations regarding FSA. I have yet to get 1 day of FSA. So I'm still struggling with that, but overall, I have very little to complain about, given what I've heard and what other people are struggling with.
Hugo, we're going to do a separate video here soon on the halfway house, how to prepare for it, how to avoid problems and what that experience is like, because many people can attest living in the halfway house is harder than serving time in federal prison because it's so much smaller. When you were at the camp at Sheridan, someone had left a YouTube comment, like 80 to 90% of people had iPhones. How did you manage to avoid the iPhones and the problems that could have kept you in prison longer?
Frankly, very frankly, the phones situation is unavoidable. You'll be exposed to it. It just depends on how much you choose to interact with that. Phones are easy to get in there if you want one. I mean, $120 will get you a nice Samsung, and this is common. Every other place, every other queue will have someone during the off hours on their phone doing this and doing that. Now, there's many other things if you want to get entertained to distract you. Before I left Sheridan, one of the things they introduced was tablets. And these tablets will allow you to rent over 100 different movies, play games, and you can actually have some kind of escape that way. The phone situation, it is something that you have to be disciplined with. It's like you're not going to take that alcohol, you're not going to take this contraband burger, you're going to just move on. And I know that it wasn't easy for me at first, but when you realize that I've seen this happen more than a half a dozen times, someone gets caught, they get removed from the camp, they lose their RDAP, they're going to be in prison another 1.5 years just because of a cell phone. It is not worth it.
Now, Hugo, I want to touch on prison adjustment and friendships for a moment. And Scott, if you could put a link to the New York Times article, just Google white collar advice, New York Times. The first line in the article, the first 2 words are Hugo Mejia. Hugo worked with the journalists from the New York Times for about 14, 15 months. The journalists followed our preparations. The journalists attended the sentencing hearing. I also filmed a YouTube video from Hugo's sentencing hearing. Hugo's in the video. But Hugo was committed to documenting it, to avoiding problems, and being productive while in prison. Hugo, I touched on the boredom that is pervasive in a federal prison camp. Did you see guys just bored out of their mind all day?
Yes.
A 1-year
Yes.
sentence felt like 10.
I suffered with that as well, because at one point I was taking books out of the library just to keep myself busy. At one point I had about a dozen books I was reading, just trying to either help my mind. Some of them were distracting, some of them were fun stories, some of them obviously was, the Stephen King stuff, but yeah, that was obviously just fluff. But it was the boredom, if I may put a point on something you spoke on before, Justin, the hardest part about being in there, it's not that you're afraid of violence or you're afraid of this. It is literally being away from your family. It is the boredom. And I made a dumb joke about it, but to use a bad metaphor, it's basically a boarding house run by the DMV. No one really cares in that, and you're not going to get a lot of sympathy. It's up to you to make it the best case. Stay in contact with your family, find support from your loved ones, and find different ways to make it positive for yourself. Because while in there, the boredom is one of the most difficult things to deal with. It's difficult to realize that, hey, the highlight of the day are my meals. That shouldn't be your highlight, but unfortunately, it's kind of set up that way. So yes, it is boredom that you will struggle with. One of the more things you'll struggle with, that is.
Now, back to Hugo for a moment and the power of self-advocacy. When Hugo originally reached out to our team, he had already hired a lawyer who claimed to be an expert in cryptocurrency. But just because someone on their website says they're an expert doesn't mean they're an expert, because I can assure you, no one knows more about crypto than Hugo. After he had that bad experience with a lawyer, he said, I have to become more proactive and mitigate. From there, he went with court-appointed counsel rather than flushing money down the drain with a lawyer. And through his own efforts, the PSR, the narrative, the letters, I think he was looking at 72 months. He got 36 months. He was home in 10 months. We document that in the New York Times article and in the YouTube video I filmed. And again, coming back to Ron, which is how we opened. Even if Judge Carter, Hugo? Or
Carney.
Even if Judge Carney gave him the 72 months or the 51 months, or if Ron got the 14 years, at least there's dignity in being able to share with his family with whom it was at sentencing. Hey, I'm not happy with the number, but I did everything I absolutely could. And I share this because there are people on this webinar who want the you all want the shortest sentence, and for whatever reason, some of you may not get it. That doesn't mean you don't work. It doesn't mean that you don't try to change the narrative and advocate, because it might not lead to the sentence you want, but it can influence the case manager and get you off probation early. Hugo got a job approved in the halfway house rather than doing something less desirable. It wasn't by accident. So
yeah,
the
Justin, if I may,
yes.
If I may, just so I can make very clear to people that are just going in and stuff like that, my experience, what I saw was in there, the people that were getting the sweetest deals when it comes to the least of time in there, or the sweet spot, was 48 to 60 months. Because of the fact that even if they didn't get the RDAP situation, the FSA alone, you had people basically getting 60-month sentence, 48-month sentence, leaving there in 14, 16 months. Whereas someone who was in there, hey, I got an 18-month sentence, they had to serve 14 months of those 18 months. There was no discount for them. So they were serving 50, 60, 70% of the time or more. Whereas people, again, that had 48 to 60 months were getting the sweeter deal.
That changed.
Yeah, I know the 18-month did change, which is good for those people. And that comes back to why this is why I want all of you to be careful with your messaging. So to be fully transparent, someone in our community was ordered to go to prison early because she posted something online the judge felt was insensitive to her victim. So our message, Scott and I had this call recently with someone who didn't prepare for their PSR. Terrible, just didn't prepare for the PSR. Lawyer ignores them. And he said, I'm going to try to write the narrative. So he sent it to Scott or me, or we looked at it and he said, what do you think? I said, this is one of the rare instances where you turn nothing in. You just, we encourage a narrative with the right, turn nothing in. And we told him why.
What's next?
So please mute yourself. Please mute yourself. So our point is, if you're going to document the journey, understand that your victims, your judge, your prosecutor, your case manager, Ron, your prosecutor will be reading your blog. Your judge will be reading your blog, according to Chris Maloney, the chief of federal probation we interviewed. So that could help you or it can hurt you. But understand, victims are reading it. Everyone's reading it. It should have the right message. And if it doesn't, they're going to pounce, which is why some people have been taken into custody, including someone in our community. Now she's kind of grateful she went in early to the camp because it gets the clock started, but still part of the reason some victims call and yell at me. In fact, I think I'm going to film that YouTube video today. Understand that, put yourself in their shoes, and even understand when you write and document it. Like Ron, on 6 years, if all goes well, people are going to be blown away at how quickly you're going to be home. I mean, if there's ever a time to go to prison, this is it, my friends. Whether you like or hate Trump, and I don't get political, I'm too busy with my family and business. Major reform passed in 2018. We think more is coming, and we want you to benefit from it. But we also want you to be sensitive if you did create a victim. If you created a victim and they see that on like in 4 years, 5 years, you're home in 12 or 13 months, it's okay to celebrate and talk about it, but be respectful of these people who feel as if there's a bit of an injustice, and be respectful with some case managers who also might think this is a bit of an injustice, who don't think that you should be able to get out of jail that early. There's been some of that issues with the drug program. I mean, look at Hugo, 36 months, 52 to 72 months. He mitigates, he gets 36 months. He's home in 10 months. Now, the victims in this case there are no perceptible victims, which is helpful, but you can see how some victims could potentially be irate. And we want you to be respectful of that. And we want you to understand and put yourself in their shoes, which is why it's a good idea with respect to mitigation. And too few people do this, which is the problem when people try to create their own message. It is helpful if you articulate the collateral consequences of what happens to you. So while Ron's victims, I'm not saying they will be, could be upset that on a 6-year sentence, he'll be out quickly. It doesn't change that he's going to miss his boy, an All-American football player, some college games he's going to have to watch on TV. It doesn't change the reputational fallout. It doesn't change the expense of how much it cost him. It doesn't change how hard it's going to be to rebuild a multi-million-dollar business again, which Ron did legally, the right way. He'll do it again, but he's a little older. It's going to take time. So the point is, good mitigation, according to Judge Boulware, a federal judge in Nevada, who said at a conference, you people ain't going to the penitentiary. Don't trick me. I've been to these camps. It ain't the penitentiary. What you can do is articulate the collateral consequences that follow your conduct in your narrative, in the PSR, in your release plan. That's one way to show the government that you get it, because the government tends to think the only consequence is prison. It is not. Frankly, for most people, it's the easiest part of the sanction. It's all of the collateral consequences that accompany it. So be honest and talk about that without complaining, but do so in a way that shows that you are introspective and thoughtful and you get it. And that's how you begin to change the narrative. That's why some victims, in my case, reached out to me in prison. Now, it helped that I had Michael helping me write, who had been in prison for 22 years. I had the right message. But to get a letter from a victim in prison saying, you're trying, you're doing it the right way, I wish you well, good luck, and by the way, I want my effing money back. And guess what? They got it because I had a plan and I documented it. These are things we want you to do. These are things we want you to do. If not, and if you don't do it, these webinars are a waste. We're just talking about prison for an hour. It's useless. It's implement it immediately, like now. And if you can do that, life will be easier for all of you. I do want to wrap up with a few people here. Richie, you're getting sentenced next week, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Richie, by the way, a couple of weeks ago, I sent out an email where he said I could share it, where Richie was saying, I got the narrative in the PSR, you got the damn release plan in the PSR, you've advocated the whole way. I don't want to get into the case. It's not relevant, white collar and all that stuff, but just how do you feel heading up to sentencing, Richie, knowing that you've done the work? What is your mindset?
Two mindsets. One is terrified
Yep.
and nervous, obviously. And, depending upon my judge, the judge can sway on self-surrendering too. He's known to, so it's possible I might go in that day. But I feel my life has completely changed for the better. My life is better now than it was before the investigation, because I started 2 days after the investigation started. That's the biggest thing that I can tell people. The first day you know what's going on, get help for whatever issue you have. Because when it came to my plea deal, my defense was able to bring more of a backing behind the deal. And that's because I got about a 50% reduction in my plea deal from the range, which is a good start. And
That's
I did
right.
I did everything, letters, personal narrative, release plan, documented everything, all my issues for ARDA. I mean, everything. I was an open book, and my narrative, I mean, the offense is bad, but the document's massive because they basically wrote what I said.
Well, that's actually the beauty, by the way, of if you can fill out your own probation forms. Like, imagine if you had wrote your own plea agreement, would it be better? Probably. If I could have written my settlement agreement with the SEC, it would have read differently. That much I can tell you. So if you have an opportunity to write out your probation forms or write out your narrative and get it into the record, it helps you. We have someone in our community, he's driving, he's going to contribute next week. He got sentenced today. You know, the range is 31 to 37 months. He got 24 months. He'll be home in 10 months. It was all his own advocacy. And thankfully, he had a lawyer that was like, I need help. And a lot of the memorandum came from the narrative that we wrote. So you've got to do the lion's share of that work. But if you could write your own narrative and get it to the government, it's going to be better. And we frequently get messages from people in our community who, I mean, we just got this a couple of days ago from someone and then Linda, I'm going to come back to you because I want to hear that success story. We had someone that got the narrative to the probation officer, and this was his text. Probation interview went very well. She already looked at my personal narrative and transcribed a lot of the information. She thanked me for making her job easy. Okay, so I mean, make their job easy. They're going to like you more. Get them the narrative. And if you've already done your PSR, that's cool. Send the narrative. Hi, Mrs. Smith. This is Justin Paperny. Thank you for interviewing me. Since our interview, I've continued to invest hundreds of hours thinking about the terrible decisions I made that led me to this predicament. I blame no one but myself. To get back on track, I've invested 100+ hours writing this personal narrative. I understand you're busy, though I'd be so grateful if you would read it and consider putting it in my completed probation report. 1, that can influence the recommendation she makes. 2, the judge can see you took the time to write the narrative for the probation officer. 3, if things change in your life, you could update the narrative for the sentencing memorandum. And 4, the only thing your case manager in prison will have access to is your probation report. Does it help or hurt you if your narrative is inside that document? Hello, the first thing your probation officer is going to do, what? Look at your probation report. That interview could be years in between. Does it help you if they see you prepared for it? We think so, but use your own judgment. We encourage you to follow the advice of federal judges and people in our community like Hugo and John and Ron who benefit. It's your choice. We just want you to own it. With that said, it's 11:13. Linda, we're going to wrap it up with you and share some good news.
Okay, am I on? Yes.
Yeah, we
Okay.
heard you.
Okay, so the good news is I had a year and a day, surrendered July 29th, got out on home confinement December 15th. Over the last weekend, the second FSA credits updated. And on Monday, I was released from home confinement.
Congratulations.
I took a gap day because they told me I didn't have to report for 72 hours to the probation office. Went yesterday, and even though I didn't have necessarily a release plan, basically I had followed everything. I didn't get in trouble, and at the end of a relatively easy probation, it's not probation, it's supervised release, but with the probation officer, relatively easy interview, he looked at me and said, look, we got a lot of bad people we're having to keep track of, and honestly, you're not really one of our problems. So please just make your payments every month, and hopefully within, half the time you can petition to get off of probation. We have 3 years supervised release. Hopefully we'll be out of that in 18 months.
Congratulations.
Also, I would say the victim was the IRS, and it appears to be, if the victim is the IRS, there's a lot of eye rolling on the other side. So that didn't hurt any either. Okay.
Yeah. Congratulations. Michael Rodstein, I'm going to send you an email. There's a lot of people that have had questions about forfeiture and restitution. So I want to create, I don't know if it'll be applicable to everyone. I'm going to create a separate workshop, Michael, outside of our webinar that I'd love to lead with you, and we'll invite people. So I'm going to be in touch, Michael, to coordinate that with you. But people have been asking for sort of that forfeiture restitution based on your experience. So we should definitely do that. I just know that it won't apply to everyone. So Michael, I'm going to coordinate that with you, okay? So we can provide that value to people.
Right. It's called sticker shock.
Yes, thank you. I was well aware of it. I've shared that. It's actually going to put up a video today about when the DOJ sued me a few years ago for the balance of my restitution. That was pretty cool to see them at my front door. But we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Talk about that in the video.
I could also add that, you know, I was actually an accountant, so I never had free time in 40 years. And all of a sudden I hit Danbury, which was a rundown camp, and the area was pretty crappy. But honestly, all of a sudden, for the first time in my adult life, I had free time. And fortunately, in my case, I like to cross stitch, and that was available to me. And it was like, oh my gosh, I actually had time to do something that I enjoyed doing. I was never bored. And I stayed, as you know, I stayed away from the TV because I've talked about that.
And that's part of the reason you're succeeding now. But by the way, I will say, and I want to be careful because we give everything away, but I will mention our team created a new probation report course. It's about 2.5 hours of video content, overview of the PSR, how to avoid problems, how to identify problems, how to respond to background information, how to get the narrative. So it's several hours worth of content on our learning management system. So if you want to learn more about the course, send a message here or respond to us. But I know a number of people in our community have gone through it, and it's really setting the stage for how to have the best. Like Richie, I think Richie, you went through the course, didn't you? Can you just touch on it just for a moment for people who have yet to do their PSR, or even if they have, if they want to improve it?
Yeah, no, it was pivotal for me to take it because it outlined everything to expect. I mean, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have the expectations of what to expect.
Yeah, it's kind of like
that.
It would be kind of like speaking to Michael or me for 3 hours about the PSR, which would put you to sleep and you'd want to hang up on us. So it's an opportunity to go through the training at your own pace, but also we see in our learning management system if you're actually doing the work. So we see completion rates. So when we speak with people, we'll do so after we've confirmed they've gone through the course. So like I know with Rita, I see you went through every course. I think it even tells us how long you watched. So if you're sitting for the probation interview, reach out. That course may be of value to you, but you can't fake it. We're going to know if you actually went through it. Okay. Okay, it's 11:17. Ron, good to see you, by the way. Thank you so much for contributing today, as always. Are there any questions we have not answered? I will coordinate a separate time for forfeiture and restitution. We continue to have more content coming out, producing a lot on prison professors. But I beg you, one clearly defined takeaway from this video: do something today, do some action step today. And it always feels good when you take action. I know it's action joining the webinar, but do more. Action always wins. That's my cliche for the day. Okay. Is that a wrap? All right. I'm going to see you next. I'm going to see all of you next week. I'll get this replay out in a couple of days. Very grateful for all of you joining our community. We know you're very busy with a lot of things competing for your attention. We're very fortunate to be a part of your life. So thank you all very much for attending. Okay, guys. Bye-bye.